Hey everyone, my name is Stephanie. I'm your host for this year's Alpha Amplify podcast. This is our third episode of season two, and we have our lovely guest today. If you want to introduce yourself a little bit, and
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Stephanie. My name is Brett Hemmerling. I lead the early careers talent attraction team at Moody's. That's a fancy way of saying I oversee the campus recruiting that we do, and I'm super excited to be
great.
here.
I want you to let's get the basics over with. Like, where are you from? All those little tiny juicy details about you. Yeah, basically.
How much time you got? Just
We
kidding.
got 30.
Yeah, no, happy to jump in and kind of give you my background. So I am originally from Nebraska,
Okay.
and yeah, no,
The travel from that distance.
it's commonly called a flyover state, so I get. But yeah, I'm from Nebraska. But I've been in New York since 2000, so that's
It's a chunk.
a long time. And I actually so getting to New York and getting to Moody's was actually really kind of fascinating and not at all expected. So I'm happy to kind of give a bit of background on that. I actually, since I think I was in fifth grade, wanted to be an actor.
Okay.
So I know it's shocking. So I studied theater in college. I went to a conservatory, full on, sleep, breathe, eat theater. And then I moved to New York right after, essentially right after graduating, to pursue that dream, and I pursued that dream for about 4 years, and then I was, like 26, and it's like, oh my gosh, this sucks. Like, you don't have insurance, you don't have like a steady paycheck, you can't
Mhm.
afford to do the cool things that New York has to offer, and when you're like, that age, that's kind of what you want to do. Um, I just wasn't enjoying myself. And I had a professor at school that said, if you can imagine yourself doing anything else, then you should absolutely do that. And of course, when you're in school and you're like in the middle of it, you're like, oh my God, that'll never happen. Theater is my life. And then again, a couple of years passed of living the reality, and I was like, yeah, I could do something else.
Mhm.
Um, I didn't know what that was going to be, but I was actually a temp at Moody's in a secretary position, like in a short term job, and then they asked me to take it full time, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is like my opportunity to like get a trajectory to do something else. Thinking I would stay for like a year, maybe two, while I found out what my next career path was going to be, and I have now just celebrated 21 years at Moody's.
Oh, that's
So
so cool.
Moody's was my career path.
That's
Uh,
almost drinking age.
I know, right? I know when I said that I moved here in 2000, that might get a response in terms of, oh, the math. Um,
Sorry.
but yeah, and I've done several different things, which is
Mhm.
kind of one of the reasons that I've stayed so long. But I've been in this role and doing the early careers and university campus stuff for
Yeah.
about 10, and it's awesome. I love it.
I I was gonna bring that up because I did a little LinkedIn stalking, and
Amazing.
I saw you were all over the place with different roles and different leadership. How did this relocation and transitions from each role kind of affect you?
Yeah. So there's a couple things. I've had different roles, and then, like you said, I've worked in different places,
Mhm.
which is like definitely something that I never expected would happen, but it came my way and was one of the best things ever. For me, it was sort of getting the initial job and at Moody's was great. Just again to kind of have a paycheck, if you will, and health insurance, which is super important, obviously, in the
Yeah.
U.S. Um, and and then I looked for something else like only a year in, and that came my way doing events. And I was like, hey, that's kind of like theater, right? I could do that. And so then I was doing corporate events and did that for a long time. And then I got really involved with our diversity initiative at Moody's and led one of our employee groups. And I was like, how do I make diversity my life? Like, how does that become, my new purpose? And I just, because of knowing the people that were the diversity team at Moody's, had those right connections. So when this job opened up in campus recruiting, which at the time actually was part of the diversity team, I was easily someone that they could consider for the job and got it. So that's sort of like having your network, keeping your options open, paying attention, selling transferable skills more than actual experience, which got me, got me started. And then similarly with moving to London for 5 years, that was also like right place, right time. A similar role that what I was doing in the U.S. opened in London to manage recruitment for Europe. And initially the idea was that I was going to just temporarily help them for a minute while they found the new person to do the job, because the campus recruiting is very cyclical. You can't just take off a month or two, then you're missing a whole year of opportunities. And then like only 2 weeks into helping them, I was asked if I wanted to move to London. I was like, yes, 100%. Easiest decision, one of the easiest decisions ever. So yeah, that's kind of how that happened. And then I've my career developed further from the role in London, and it brought me back here.
I feel like when you're going to a new location, you're gonna feel lonely because you don't know anyone else there. Like how do you kind of combat that feeling?
Yeah, it's in me being when I was in London, I had COVID on top of just life,
Yeah.
so it was definitely a very special time to be in that universe. I had a couple things that helped me. One, I'm married. My husband came with me. My company actually sponsored a visa for him to come and work in London as well, which was great. So he came with me, but he's in theater, so I'm still tied to it. So he was back and forth quite a bit. But he was there with me for a good amount of time. I already knew people from work, which was helpful because of just having been with the company already for
a decent chunk,
like 15 years. Yeah, at that point, so I had connections in London, a couple close friends, but not a lot of people. And it's London isn't a super easy place to meet people.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, I think New York gets a bad rap for that. We definitely are much easier going. You just gotta break the ice and approach us. But it was fine. Again, I'm in this relationship. We're pretty self-sufficient.
Yeah.
To a point. And then we had COVID together, and that was a lot of together time. But it was really sort of the tail end of my time in London that was really hard because my husband had moved back to the U.S. for the most part, and then I would realize, oh my gosh, I only have like 4 friends here, and if nobody's available on a Friday, like I have literally nothing to do. So that was one of the reasons I was really excited to come back to New York.
I need to go back home.
I know, where I've got my network of people and all that. So it was a little lonely, but knowing that it was not a forever situation, it's like, okay, I can get through like 6 more months of this or whatever it was.
I got like an end point, so I can keep going until then.
Yeah, keep myself busy with plenty of other things, and then I knew I was going to move back to New York almost a full year before I moved. So then it's like, okay, how many more things do I have to do? What else do I want to see? And one of the best parts about London is it's so close to Europe. So it's like, where else do I want to go?
Easy traveling too.
So easy to travel.
I went there for like a few months, like a month with my family. Like I went to France, but just like going in train. I'm like, okay, casual.
Yeah. Well, this is amazing. Is like, to get from New York to DC on a train, it's like 3 hours or something.
I've never gone by train, to be honest.
It's nice.
Oh, really?
But London to Paris is 2 hours and 15 minutes.
Yeah, it wasn't.
I mean, we could sit in traffic for 2 hours and 15 minutes.
You can read a book.
Yeah, exactly.
It's livable. You said like you had like 5 years in London, so you probably saw like a big difference in how early career was there and here. How would you describe how they approach it?
There is differences, and there's actually differences between how it works in the UK and how it works in the rest of Europe.
Mm-hmm.
The UK, a lot of ways, is more similar to the US. Like everybody wants a summer internship, and they go to a 4-year bachelor's degree, and then maybe they get a master's, maybe they don't, and there's a lot of similarities there. In Europe, though, it can differ from country to country, but it's more common to have a master's level degree, and for people to go straight from the bachelor's to the master's, it's like a 5-year as opposed to like a 6 or 7-year commitment. I don't know, but I assume it's cheaper. That's probably also one of the reasons that they do that. So it's not common to see to recruit bachelor's level students in Europe. There's almost always masters of some sort, but They also are looking for like 6-month internships or even sometimes full year
Oh,
internships.
so they want more of a longer term type of thing.
Yeah,
So I guess
yeah.
the knowledge makes sense for like they want you for so long, like they'll hope you have the knowledge for it. I guess.
Yeah, well, and like if you take like a France for example, the intern is really meant to be. They're supposed to be learning that entire 6 months.
Mhm.
It's they're not you're not expected that they're going to produce all this work for you as a company. Like that's part of a side piece of it, but really
Yeah.
you're there to train them up, and to mentor them as part of the 6 months period. Um, Obviously, you learn a lot more about a person in 6 months than you do in 10 weeks, which is a positive
Yeah.
compared to what we have here in the U.S. But it's just a very different scenario. But I would say one of the other things that is significantly different from the recruitment process, and not just with us at Moody's, but with other companies, is in European countries, they do a lot more testing and assessments, like actual like psychometric testing, or they might do like some sort of written test, or you might have to do some sort of coding test, and like that's just really
Yeah.
common. It happens in the U.S. too, somewhat, especially on technical roles like engineering, but you know we here in the US we don't do any testing, and it's very much like not okay to do it from many standpoints that
Yeah, because I feel
within.
like, yeah, I didn't think of that. That was like a cool little fact, I guess.
Yeah, and so I mean I like it. I don't like. I know testing is testing, but
Hmm.
I like that we don't do it
And you
because
like,
that's just another layer of sort of stress, I'm sure, for
hmm,
students, right? So focus more on the interviewing and like what are the right questions to ask, and what are you actually trying to assess in those questions is really important.
oh, so you do some of the like interview questions sometimes as well, or are you more just recruiting in your role?
So I don't do any interview questions myself, and I used to actually do recruiting. Recruit like specifically. I used to actually recruit for certain roles, and especially when I was in Europe, and we would have to do some of the testing,
Oh,
like the
really?
and the facilitation of tests and stuff like that, which is again um, interesting. It can be excessive, and that was one of the things that I focused on when I was there. I was like, how do we cut down on this, because it just seems like we're
Would you
asking a
see
lot.
them?
And
Would
I
you?
think that's
Yeah.
sorry, that's
No,
the thing I
no.
think is different now, is that students just are not really okay with that.
Hmm.
They want it to be a very streamlined and sort of efficient process, which is totally makes
Yeah.
sense.
Would you say like you would see them more burnt out over there because of the exams, or?
Um, I wouldn't say burnt out. I don't think that, and this is one of the things that I've just been hearing about in like research and from peer groups, is that today students apply for hundreds and hundreds of jobs. They're not
Yeah.
just applying for like the 5 that they want to possibly get. Like you're throwing your net very wide, and so I think that's one of the reasons that companies are probably scaling back on what we're asking of students to do, because we know that we're again one of 100 applications and
Yeah.
maybe one of 25 processes that they're going to go through. It's like,
And missing out on possible like potential talent because like there's too many processes of it.
yeah, and also we don't want it to take too long, because also once recruiting starts, it just goes
Hmm.
faster and faster, and that's one of the things that also I think has changed in the 10 years that I've been doing the recruiting and been involved with campus recruiting, is that you used to leave like an application note for 3 or 4 months, and then students wouldn't hear, and then finally we'd close the applications down or whatever. And now it's like, okay, what's the least amount of time we can leave it open, be realistic about how quickly we can,
Hmm.
you know, decide who we want to interview, put them through a process, make a decision, just so that again, if you all are applying for hundreds of jobs, we don't want you to wait for 6 months to hear from us.
Yeah, because then you choose someone
That's
else as well in the
yeah,
process. Yeah.
and again, it's like that's a stress that you just don't need. And if we could be more efficient, then why not?
That's true. Hmm. I wanted to ask about your like, go back to your theater. Like, do you see yourself using your theater experience like with networking and like in your job in day to day
Well,
basis?
I'm obviously using it right now, in
Yeah.
case you weren't aware. Um, yeah. No, I 100% do, and I know like you wondered about like, am I okay with networking and
Yeah.
talking to students, talking to anybody? Yes, 100%. Um, I will say networking and like performing is not exactly the same.
Mm.
Even like improvisation is not exactly the same as like just getting up on your feet and speaking or making a presentation. That did take time to kind of like adjust to,
Yeah.
um, but definitely kind of reading body language and kind of reading the room, if you will, is something that theater experience has helped with. And so I do see myself kind of using that all the time. So that's something I would highlight if you have a chance to take a theater class. There are skills that you will use, just
Yeah.
like learning presentation skills, right?
Oh.
It's like I know, it's a must do. It's a must do.
Yeah, we had to learn. For myself, I chose this role to put myself out there. So I understand that completely. Like, you have to make yourself comfortable with uncomfortable. Like, that cheesy saying that everyone says, but it's necessary.
Yeah, 100%. And one of the things around like making yourself uncomfortable is getting in situations where you are sort of the outlier in the room is also something that has helped me over time. Just kind of be comfortable being uncomfortable, but just being comfortable, not needing to be sort of the center of the room, like kind of listening and learning and picking up on things from people and just making observations and sort of educating myself has been a really cool thing. I think that doesn't always happen.
You're being a sponge, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, a sponge.
Like, we're trying to soak up all this knowledge, like acting like a student all over again. 'Cause I feel like that's what the whole purpose of networking is sometimes, to just sponge any knowledge you get from them.
Yeah, and it's also like networking is it's keep speaking, but it's also listening and like trying to very in the moment process what they're saying, and then like but not thinking about what you're going to respond, because then you stop listening. It's like it's hard.
It always, yeah. We're humans. I feel like humans always just want to react and listen. Like, instead of listening, we're like, oh, how am I gonna respond? How am I gonna respond?
Yeah,
It's just a playing game at that point when you're talking to somebody. Like, what am I gonna say next?
and it's so easy just to jump right in. Like I just did that as you were speaking. So
I do
apologies.
it too. No, I do it too. I know you had a lot of leadership like experiences. What's one pivotal thing that has happened that yeah.
Yeah. The most important one was taking the job in London, 100%. And I think one of the main reasons is because it gave me the opportunity to go learn a whole new area. Like, it was still campus recruiting and it was still my same company, but to go and learn a different region, like professionally, is super, super impactful. Because one of my goals was to have a job that had global responsibility. Like, at some point in my career, like that was something that I really wanted to do. And I knew that for that to be possible, you kind of needed to know at least two places, at minimum, to kind of say, hey, I might be able to manage something that's even bigger in scope. And I'd seen, over my first 15 years at Moody's, other people do similar things like that and come back and then, be back in New York, which is our headquarters, and have these global jobs. So I was like, hey, this would be an ultimate goal, not like necessarily I have to get it, but, just to go and learn something completely different to show that I could, but also just to have the experience professionally and personally was so impactful. So that was again, as I said earlier, one of the easiest decisions I ever made, but it was also one of the biggest, changes to my life that's had such a big impact.
That's really cool. And I feel like, with going back to like early career, like, what's one like big advice you would give for students that are starting up in the financial service industry?
Yeah, a couple things. Definitely learn about the opportunities that are in the industry, like the different parts of the industry, the different types of companies. Because to be very honest, I used to hear a lot like, "Oh, I want to work in investment banking." Okay, doing what? Like, what is it that you want to do? And so I just want to be an investment banker. Which, again, I get this. I get the appeal or the splash, that can have. But I would always just say, hey, learn more about like what is that, and learn about other types of companies, because obviously I don't work at an investment bank. But again, nothing saying there's anything wrong with investment banks, but just that there's other types of opportunities and experiences you can have, and part of that also goes with learning about like what are your aspirations, and if you know for sure you want to be an investment banker, that's great, but it's a long career. You've already heard I went from a very different type of life to this one many times over. So kind of not being too set on what you want to do and being open and listening for like what else there might be, and also the world and corporate world, especially, like changing all the time. So things that may be the big, exciting jobs that you could have, they might not even exist yet because we don't even do whatever that is, right? Like who would have imagined that you could work in like Gen AI,
Yeah,
right?
everything.
Even like 2, 3 years ago, much less like 20.
Yeah, I feel. Ooh, I feel because everything's like you have to be willing to change, and I feel with our generation as well, we're very scared for change.
Mm,
But when you're going into the corporate world, you have to be willing to be like, oh, there's new opportunities opening up. Are you willing to do it? Like you have to be more
yeah.
like on your toes. If something comes to you, like kind of have to say yes sometimes because you never know what's gonna come with it.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many things I could say. Like to just talk. You touched on so much that I wanted to also share. So like, yes, there's you can get known for certain things, like especially if you stay at a
Hmm.
company for a long time, or you have a network even across companies. That's going to totally be rewarding because the people will think of you when they have these
Yeah.
opportunities, either within the same company or someone that you worked with goes to another company. Like, oh, I worked with Stephanie and she was amazing on X, Y, and Z, and we should try to get her over here. That's just the way
Yeah.
companies work, right? Um, but and I lost my train of thought. I had so many things I was going to say. Oh, yes. The other thing I was going to say then, kind of going back to
Change things.
change,
Hmm.
yes, because that was surprising to me. Because like my generation, yes, absolutely, and like like just where I grew up, change terrifying, absolutely
Hmm.
terrifying. I'm definitely okay with it now for the most part, but like that's been a journey for me. So I think sort of being comfortable with change, being comfortable with uncertainty is something you
You
just
gotta
kind of
get
have to
out.
face. But in terms of skills and as you you get out there, being adaptable and resilient are two of the main things
Yeah.
that again early in your career especially something to focus on because not everybody is, and the more adaptable and resilient you are and that you can show, especially in a work environment, then people are comfortable sort of giving you new things to work on or pushing you to do different things because like, oh yeah,
It's just
they
gross.
absolutely can handle that.
Yeah. What's it called? I know for myself, I hate change with like a whole background. I'm like, oh, I have to move somewhere else. No, thank you. I
uh,
like my little spot right now
are you
where I
from
am.
Newark?
No, I moved around so much. Like I moved all in Union County that I don't know where any else of the counties are, but um I just hated moving. So I'm like, oh, I had to be the new kid again. I had to do all these new things, and like, no, never been my comfortability, but. We gotta keep doing it. We gotta keep moving. That's all we really can do half the time.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, and the more comfortable you get with it, then it's kind of just becomes second nature. Like, oh, and I've got to learn new things.
Yeah. I when you were talking, I also thought about like imposter syndrome. Like, I feel like with Hispanics as well, we feel like, oh, we don't fit in some spaces.
Mm.
So, and like when you went to London, maybe you felt a little bit of imposter syndrome as well. I can't even say the word, but like, how did you approach that type of feelings, or like, how do you tell students how to approach it?
Yeah, it's a tough one, and I think everybody deals with it.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are just better at
Managing.
masking it, or faking it till they make it. Right, fake it till you make it. It, it's for imposter syndrome. You really have to just focus on what is it that you do know to start with,
Mm-hmm.
um, and um, and for me, how I would get through some of the imposter syndrome is ask lots of questions. It's like, oh, I want to know more about this. It's secretly saying, yeah, because I don't know anything about what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Even if, and sometimes I would get in those situations, and then someone would start explaining something, and I'd be like, oh, I totally know this. I already know all of what they're telling me, but I'm going to pretend like I don't because,
Yeah.
they're going to keep reassuring me that I'm in a good spot.
Yeah.
So that's a total trick of the trade for me. But I think everyone has imposter syndrome. For me, it's because when I moved into this role that I have now, I told my one of my mentors, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm such an imposter. And she's like, oh yeah, everyone is.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. So it was reassuring to hear from someone that I looked up to that she was also feeling the
Yeah.
same way. So I think verbalizing it to people that you trust is important because they're probably
Yeah.
going to come back and tell you that you're not alone.
Mm-hmm. I feel like everyone. Oh, like everyone goes through it. I feel like everyone's gonna feel it. like, oh, you're not alone. You're not the
Yeah.
only one in the room that's probably feeling those feelings. Like, and I think in our own minds we always like, oh, it's only just me. Like no
Mm.
one else is going through this. It's my issue. I gotta deal with it. But no, there's people around you that do love you and that will push you forward, like how you were saying earlier.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why it's so important to be parts of organizations like Alpha, and
Hmm.
other clubs and networks and just friend groups on top of
Yeah.
everything, right? Is because you can't do it alone. And you could, but you shouldn't. It's a much better experience
Yeah.
to if you've got support networks and just people to bounce things off of, and I think that's a critical thing, especially again at this stage of school and carrying that over into the early part of your career. I would highly recommend it.
Yeah, I feel like that's also why mentorship like exists because there's people that already were in your shoes and like you look to them for guidance because they know what you're talking about. Like, oh, I felt that. I felt the same thing. Let me give you some tips on how to approach it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we're not bringing any new ideas to the table at this point
Yeah.
in the history of the world, I would imagine. Well,
Hmm.
that's generalization, but yeah, I think that you hit a good point. Is that there's people that have had similar challenges or concerns and or triumphs even, and so getting them to kind of talk about them as a starting point, because your story is not going to be the same as their story, but there's going to be overlap for
Yeah,
sure.
everyone's path is different, but in those paths, there's going to be similar things you went through and like similar potholes that someone else probably went through as well.
Yeah,
Like, but we all end up at the same like you guys all end up at the same company for a reason. You guys all have qualities that make you who you are, and someone saw that in you. There's a reason why you got chosen. At the end of the day, you are in this role for a reason.
yeah,
So
one hundred percent.
I feel like with people that are starting up their new internships, like that's something you really need to acknowledge your own self because they chose you for a reason. They saw something in you, even if you didn't have the experience.
Mm-hmm.
You still show that you wanted to be here. And I feel like earlier you were talking about like, oh, I want to be in this company, but why? Like
Yeah,
there's everyone has a why, but you need to really know what it is.
yeah, and I think going back to that about I want to be in a certain company and understanding that what's driving that, if it's just the brand of the company,
Mm-hmm.
that's definitely something that gets people excited. But um, I highly recommend also learning about not just what they do, but who are they as a
Yeah.
company before you join them. And that's part of being an intern too, is you should learn over the 10 weeks or whatever, quite a bit about culture and their values and sort of their mission and all of that. And that's the best time to learn those things is when you're you're only there for a bit, because
Yeah.
you could absolutely hate it. But again, it's like me coming back to the US from London is like I knew it was only for a certain amount of time before that was going to be over. So it's the same. You're going to learn all kinds of things in that period, um, and also you learn, especially in early roles that you take, in addition to the internships, not only like things you want to do, but things you don't want to do ever again.
Yeah.
And so then as you as you start to look for other opportunities or you develop your career, it's like, oh, looks like that's a lot of this, and I did that, and I don't want to ever do that again, whatever that might be. So that's everything's opportunity,
Everything's starting point.
especially
Yeah.
at the beginning.
So just to close off everything, what's some like that one advice you always tell students, like at networking or anything in general, that you feel is very impactful?
Um, yeah, of course. Now I'm gonna have to go to my iPad.
Oh.
No, I'm just kidding. The one thing advice I think the main thing, and it's reiterating something I've already said, is like be pay attention and listen and look for opportunities, and ask a lot of questions. Maybe is the thing is what it comes down to. Something I mentioned earlier
Mm-hmm.
also is be curious, be intellectually curious is the phrase that we use at Moody's all the time, and that just shows that you're learning, you're developing, but we're also trying to find your place in the world. That's
Yeah.
a very sort of broad statement, but
The average
um,
college student just trying to find where they need to
yeah,
be.
exactly. So definitely keep your ears, your eyes open. Build your network as well, especially in school and then coming out forever, but especially the early times, because it is a long career
Journey.
experience journey. Yeah, so you never know what connections you have could lead you to something else, not next year, not 5 years, but 10 years, whatever it might be, that are still relationships. And even though we're like, so tech based as a society now, a lot of places are still very much relationship driven. And so building those relationships, it's not going to hurt for sure. So you might as well invest in people.
And it always helps you as well. Like, oh, I know that person. That I have somewhere I can have a corner that, and that's not what I wanted to say, but like, there's someone in your corner that you can always rely on, or like, oh, somewhere to like just get help at the end
Yeah.
of the day.
Yeah, definitely. And the support network and support can look like all kinds of things, right? So building that and keeping that going is in its own a bit of a job, right? Because you need to keep your network alive, but it's definitely worth the time.
That's a great way to end this up. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please like and subscribe, and look at our past videos if you really want to look into like different professionals and in all that sense. Thank you so much for coming. I
Pleasure.
love the story. I love your story and where you like your whole path to get where you are now. And if you want to like, I guess, fuel your little like LinkedIn or something like that, where
Oh
I can
yeah,
reach out to you.
yeah, absolutely. It's Brett Hemmerling. I'm the only
Yeah.
one I think on LinkedIn. And then Moody's, Moody's.com, and you'll find all the jobs and opportunities that we have.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Bye.
Awesome. Thank you.